Hello, welcome back to my channel. How are you doing? This is part 2 of my full Natlan analysis. We already went through everything that went wrong in Natlan's design and world building and so on in the first part that you will find here, by the way. If you're new to this channel and don't know me yet, I am a trained archaeologist and Genshin player. Normally I do deep delves videos behind real life historical references in Genshin, but this time, as you heard, we'll be doing something a little different. But if you are interested in Genshin and history, don't forget to leave me a like, give me a follow, comment below, or you can also follow me on HioLab. You will find the link in the description. Without further ado, let's jump straight in. So, all the way back on the 28th of August 2024, we finally left Fontaine behind and embarked on our journey to the next region called Natlan. I must admit I was a little bit surprised by its location. I was expecting them to put it somewhere between Fontaine and Mondstadt, or maybe to the west of Fontaine, you know, behind the Mount Azus region. There's a lot of space there, but it ended up being right behind the Hadramaret desert, which makes sense, or kind of, since this is the probably the most dangerous part of the desert, and I find it strengthens Natlan's isolation as a nation. We've been wondering since forever why we didn't have any Natlanese NPCs around, and why we got very scanty references to Natlans around. And I guess this kind of solves it, as well as being isolated by its very faulty leyline network, of which we will talk a lot later in the video. Natlan is also set apart by very concrete geographical obstacles, apparently. So the first thing we stumble across while entering this new region is actually our Saurian companion, Housewheat. And this happens in a very peculiar space. We are clearly out of regular Teyvat, and all the blurring and weird voice calling us the Chosen of Dragons make it clear that we have stepped into World Quest territory right away. Just a quick note before we go further, I will not be discussing the lore surrounding our little one and the archon Natlan's World Quest, mainly because, you know, the full picture is still missing, since I hope to release this still before the 5.5 update, or well, in the worst case scenario we will still be in the very first days of it. So yeah, we still don't know how things will turn out. So for now, just the Archon quest. And also I personally believe that as much as there could be a very relevant lore for the main plot there, I also believe that, like every other world quest that has given relevant lore, the main plot of the quest will be mostly confined to the region. So we probably won't have characters that will go around doing things in the future. This will all stay in Natlan. It might give us some clues, like the Narzissenkites quest and, for example, the Kvarna quest did in previous versions, but nothing more. So the only thing I will note is that, of course, the space we meet our little one in is clearly tied to the dragon civilization. This is evident in the mechanisms that lie around. Also, clearly our Saurian companion is very special, though we still don't know how much. before we start delving in the actual Archon quest, last call for, of course, all the spoilers that you might think of. They will all be there, so watch at your own risk, starting from now. So we extract ourselves from that weird place and make our way to the Children of Echo's tribe, together with our new friend, and come across our first playable character, that's to say Kachina, who is in the process of being ditched by her own team companions. As we approach her, she introduces us to a whole bunch of new concepts that by now I guess we are all familiar with, so I won't take much time explaining them unless they later become somehow relevant. Those are the Y-Ups, the Night Kingdom, the Pilgrimage, and the Night Warden Wars, and most notably Ancient Names. So the first unexpected thing here, and we'll be looking a lot at unexpected and weird things, is this sentence, which looks very much to me as a criticism of the whole vision system. I know Genshin isn't new to this. Multiple characters have already expressed their nuanced opinions on this structure where some are chosen and some are not. But I don't know, to start a new Archon quest like this just kind of sets the mood. As we progress and accompany Kachina towards the stadium to register, a second very unexpected thing happens. So we told her that we are capable of tuning ourselves to all the elements through the Saturas of the Seven, but of course, as we try to gain our new pyro abilities...
Oh, since we're here, you might as well go get your shiny new elemental powers, Traveler! Huh? That's not right. Is the statue asleep or something?
Nothing happens. Which is really interesting if you consider that we won't have our pyro powers until very late in the Archon quest, and we will get them from the Lord of the Night instead of the Archon statue. This, together with the fact that we have to get our constellations by offering, I don't know what it's called, the amber thing to the, well, what's left of the captain, who is now one and the same with the Lord of the Night, kind of makes me think there's a link, at least in our case, between our powers and the ley lines, and maybe also the constellation system, who knows? This also suggests that although as Descenders we are not recorded in Tibet ley lines, we are still capable of interacting with them, as we saw also during the last Lantern Ride, where we quite literally saved Hu Tao's life. And yeah, let's say if half of what I'm about to say here proves to be correct, we might really need that ability of ours in later stages of the game for very, very serious purposes. Right after we fail to obtain our pyro powers, at least for now, something really interesting happens.
Oh, that's a cuckoo soar. They fly high and fast, and they're always full of energy.
A Cuckoosaurus decides to fly over our heads, and we can't think of anything better to say than, it reminds me of Mondstadt. Now, by itself, this literal reference would mean nothing. But I'm telling you, bear this in mind. We'll be counting how many references to Mondstadt are put just in 5.0. and there will be plenty. And I'm telling you, this is the first big clue on what this whole Archon quest is truly about. We're in the later stages of the game. This quest is not just about Natlan. We're starting to get all those loose threads back together and weave them into a coherent plot at last. Going on in the direction of the stadium, we get told two more things. Firstly, that the Pyro Archon is a human, a regular human, which should have been one of the core points of the whole plot. I'm not sure how much of a real impact it had, but anyway. And secondly, we discover to no one's surprise that we are able to use phlogiston mechanism. Now, this might look at first sight like a case of main character syndrome, though if you think of what we said about phlogiston in my part 1 video, that could make actually a lot of sense. We'll get told by the Lord of the Night later on that phlogiston is just pure undivided energy. So it's basically an original element, and given our original powers, we are associated with white light, which divides into the 7 colors. It makes way more sense than expected. Once we get to the stadium, the story focuses more on Kachina and the tournament. We get to meet Mwalani, Kinich, and Ahau. Oh my god, Ahau. What an experience. And then basically just step aside for once. And there's nothing really interesting going on except for one thing, and that's, well, the participants in the Night Warden Wars are fighting the Abyss directly. And that's not something we've seen very often, have we? I mean, our last direct encounter with the Abyss dates back to what? Well, you could say that the narwhal we saw in Fontaine has something to do with the Abyss. The Abyss Order definitely has something to do with the Abyss, but is also something different. So the only direct confrontation we had so far with the Abyss itself was all the way back in the Perilous Trail quest. And if you ask me, this does give something of an unsettling feeling. I remember while I was playing through this part, I thought to myself, okay, this is different. This gives a different vibe. This feeling gets further reinforced once we accompany Molani back to her tribe, supposedly to relax, and I mean, we did get to have a nice bath in the hot springs, but we also got to meet Atia and know a little bit about her, her injury, her problems with abyssal corrosion, and to top it all, during the night we witness a massive attack on the people of the springs, which leads to the next two big surprises. The first one is actually our first abyssal pylon. Abyssal pylons are said to be portals, which should bring even more atrocities to Tabat, and they look kind of similar to a material we already had in game for some time. So maybe Baijo havers will understand? Yes, this is the drop from the Baptist boss in the Sumera Desert. And this makes me think, I mean, it's kind of obvious by now, but it seems like lectors and Baptists and all are just trying to kind of invite the Abyss into Tibet, aren't they? This is kind of a confirmation. But anyway, the second surprise is actually our second and most important reference to Mondstadt. So So, of course, Atia gets injured again during the attack, but this time we actually do something useful, or try to do something useful, because we suddenly remember that all through this game, we always had the capacity to purify the abyss. And this leads to a full-blown flashback to the scene where we purified one of the volunteers in Jean's office, all the way back in the first Archon quest, with Lisa explaining that basically our nature repels the abyss.
The impurities and the elemental energy we embody repel each other.
What? The crystal has been purified? When?
The anguish he feels has brought him to tears. I also came across a teardrop crystal. Can you purify it?
What is this? Some sort of purification? The abyssal power, it's being cleansed away!
I mean, this won't save Atia in the end, but I guess we at least gave her some more time, so yeah. Another interesting thing is what we'll learn from Mualani once the attack gets finally resolved. So, in talking about the abyss, she describes it as a cunning entity, despite it not being a living thing. The abyss isn't alive, but somehow it mimics life, and it does so because it has access to the data stored, in Mualani's words, in the Night Kingdom. And this is the first clue that we get about what the Night Kingdom truly is for Natlan. But we already know where datas are stored in the rest of Teyvat. That would be the Irminsul, of course, and the ley lines. So the abyss attacks ley lines, and in Natlan, where ley lines aren't as abundant, of course, it would attack the Night Kingdom. And by attacking the Night Kingdom, it's able to tailor some kind of catastrophe to its victims. That's really interesting. That's probably the first time we get an actual description of the abyss. Other than that, I guess life goes on. A random attack is no big news in Natlan after all, given the general situation. So we just go back to the stadium where it would be time to celebrate Kachina and the others, but that's the big shocker about version 5.0, isn't it? The Ode of Resurrection isn't working properly anymore, so Kachina gets stuck into the Night Kingdom. There is actually one more interesting detail hidden in the hymn they're singing here. And again, it brings us back to Mondstadt. You see this verse here? Those who grew along sun and wind. I mean, I would be expecting the sun, since, pyro and all. But what about the wind? We haven't been hearing much about the wind ever since Mondstadt. And it really makes me think that's not the only connection, potentially, that Natlan and Mondstadt have. There's at least two others, and they could even be interconnected. So the first one is actually Vanessa, the founder of the Knights of Pavonius, and the one who liberated Mondstadt from the Lawrence clan. She and her people were said to be a tribe from Natlan that was forced to leave. And that's quite strange, since in Natlan we get told that the Natlanese can't leave their home country that easily, because otherwise they would be cut off from the Night Kingdom, and that could have some very serious consequences. So what happened? The answer is probably in the other thing connecting potentially Natlan and Mondstadt, and that's to say the Marujibari. Marujibari is this area that was originally in Natlan and then disappeared some time ago. But the first time we actually heard about it was in Mondstadt during, I think it was Venti's story quest. And we met Stanley, or rather fake Stanley, I forgot his real name, and got to know his story and how he was saved by the real Stanley in the Marajibari. And what's really interesting is that apparently for a place that's off the charts, off the maps, Venti still seems to have access to it somehow, since it brings back the real Stanley's soul from the Marajibari. Yeah. So all this talk of sun and wind instantly got me back to, okay, what if Vanessa and her tribe somehow were forced to flee Natlan for some reason, and they were maybe the missing Pyro tribe, because we have a tribe for each element except for Pyro, which is strange. And maybe they also were the ones inhabiting the Marujibari. That's all speculation, I admit it, but it kind of makes sense. And again, we are constantly brought potentially back to Mondstadt. Not Liyue, not Fontaine, not Inazuma, not Sumeru, not any other nation, just Mondstadt. Anyway, I am tempted to consider this as the third Mondstadt reference in this version. Back to Kachina's situation, Mawika immediately launches an investigation and invites us to join, alongside Kinich, Mwalani, Chaska, and Jensen. In the speaker chamber, we get to learn just how dire Nathan's situation has become. Basically, the whole big pilgrimage ritual was never completely effective in repelling the abyss, so things have been progressively getting worse over time, and we're nearing the breaking point. Mawika's proposition is actually to use her own flame, the one she awakened upon becoming an archon, to fuel the sacred flame for a little longer while we get in contact with Citlali and use the Spirit Speaker Stone to retrieve Kachina's ancient name from the Night Kingdom. This process should permanently weaken Mawika. And I get this is probably also a plot device to kind of raise the stakes for the next fight, the one with Capitano, but overall, it just fails. Why? Well, first of all, because during that fight, Mawika never really seems to struggle. And other than that, even after that fight, we never see any clues that give away the fact that Mawika is not what she used to be anymore. But enough with the criticism, let's get on with the good part. The fight itself is, oh my god, just so good. Probably one of the very best miHoYo has ever done in this game. And if you look closely, there's actually a detail that I think all of us have missed on our first playthrough, but once you look back, after completing the whole archon quest, you will notice, and it takes on a whole different meaning. So, something I didn't quite understand back then was why Capitano, after retreating here, doesn't attempt to seize the Gnosis anymore, despite his own men actually encouraging him to do so. After all, it should be their number one priority, right? And of course, once you know Capitano's full story, you will understand. Because you see, Mawika came inches from destroying that core. She probably damaged it, in fact. And that's why we have Guthrie's soul attached to Auron in 5.1. That's probably the point where he escaped from the core and had nowhere to go but Oberon. And yeah, that was actually quite fortunate, because otherwise he would have been lost. This was a bit of a mind blow, actually. And of course, Capitano isn't going to risk any more damages to that core of his, not even for the Gnosis. Other than that, yeah, I will just note this is something that was all over the place when this update came out, and I was quite skeptical back then, but so Pyroclaimer with, I quote, a penchant for black against Cryosword. Oh, sorry, Canrian Cryosword. Do you know anything about that? Yeah. I was reluctant to consider this as a reference to the Kaya versus Diluc fight, but considering how many references they made to Mondstadt in this quest, I have to consider this as the fourth reference to Mondstadt. They're starting really to pile up. And I'm not even finished yet, because we'll get another 2 of them in a few minutes. So, first of all, while all of this unfolds in the stadium, we, Molani and Chaska, go to the Scions of the Canopy, retrieve the Spirit Speaker Stone from Buina, and enlist Vichama's help, under the condition that we also search for Malka's ancient name in the Night Kingdom. They really were an excellent couple. Unfortunately, soon after we managed to retrieve Kachina's ancient name from the Night Kingdom, the stone starts to get out of control, so Chaska has to destroy it, much to Vichama's despair. When we go back to the tribe and give the pieces back to Waina, Paimon comments that it's a shame a certain tone-deaf bard isn't here, because otherwise he would probably know how to make the Spirit Speaker Stone look whole, just like he did for the Holy Lyre der Himmel. Don't you see? This is deliberate. Reference number 5, guys. 5 of them in one Archon quest. With Kachina's ancient names finally in our hands, we can go back to the stadium and reunite with Mawika and Yansan and begin the ritual that will essentially allow us to bot into the Night Kingdom to save a little soldier. Before that, however, we get to have our own private tour of Mawika's collection of objects from all the ancient heroes of Natlan, among which a collection of ceremonial vases given by the Masters of the Night Wind. But what was apparently really important was the content of one of those, which, according to Mawika, was
grape juice.
Yeah. I mean, I know they're joking, right? They could be joking. Because people have been comparing Mawika and Diluc probably since the start, and for good reason, because they kind of look similar. But at this point, we've got reference number 6. Is this just a joke? I will probably give you an answer by the end of this video, but for now, before going, we actually get to talk some more with Mawika, and she brings up the topic of time, which is one we have seen turn out quite often in this game, ever since the Thousand Wind Temple quest, which is related to the God of Time. Then we had Istaroth, the aforementioned God of Time, again in Kanomiya, and all the timey-wimey business with the Sacred Sakura Seed in a story quest in Inazuma. Then we got to witness what a samsara is, so the times cycle business in the Sumeru Archon quest. And lastly, in Fontaine, we came across the cyclic theory again in the Narzissenkreuz World Quest and René's notes. But this is actually a different concept. Mawika states that time is punctual, and in each instant, past, present, and future actually coexist. This is an interesting theory and one that justifies probably the fact that she was able to essentially time travel 500 years in the future through the Sacred Flame. But I'm left wondering if there's actually more to it than just trying to come up with a good justification for her death and resurrection, so to speak. Once we get to the Night Kingdom through what is essentially a rift opened by the abyss in one of the draconic ruins, which kind of made me think, is it just me, or are draconic ruins somehow closer to the Night Kingdom than the rest of Natlan? Who knows? Anyway, once we get there, we soon meet Malko, Bichama's friend, or maybe boyfriend, I don't know. They do seem pretty close for a couple of friends, so yeah. And he helps us navigate the sea of souls, of corrupted souls that we find there. And those souls look quite similar visually to those who attacked us all the way back in the Perilous Trail quest as we were trying to escape that sort of weird abyssal space. The other interesting thing comes when we finally find Kachina, and she lets us know that one of the Wayub is actually in dire need of our help, since corruption is spreading to her as well. We managed to drive the abyss away, and as a reward, she points us to the exit. Now, other than seeing Umualani turn into one of the 6 heroes of Natlan, here we have our first clues to what Wayub truly are. So first of all, the voice of the Wayub is quite similar to what will be the voice of the Lord of the Night in the next quest. And she also, like the Lord of the Night, uses Sealies to guide us. So it's highly likely that Wayubs either are manifestations of the Lord of the Night, or perhaps fellow Sealies that decided to help her establish the Night Kingdom. So with her help, we managed to get back to the Rift location, but we're a tiny bit too late. And so in the end, it's Mawika that uses her objects collection, the flame stored in those objects, to force us out of the Night Kingdom. All's well what ends well, and we even witnessed one of the 6 eras emerging, so maybe Mawika's plan will work after all. But we're still not sure, and we still got a very real problem coming up, and 5.1 will make this further clear. If the abyss felt already pretty close in version 5.0, by the next patch, it's pretty clear it's laying just inches under the surface and could break loose at virtually any moment. Right off the bat, we'd get this information from Catherine that the Abyss has been intensifying its attacks on all 6 tribes. Meanwhile, we're still 2 heroes short to make Mawika's plan work. So yeah, the tension is really starting to mount here. 5.1 first half will really focus on this feeling, on Natlan's core problem and all of its possible solutions, and of course also on the 2 main protagonists of this whole arc, Mawika on one side and Capitano on the other. In the process, loads of lore will be given. 5.1 is probably one of the most, probably the most lore-packed version of the Natlan chapter. So we really have a lot to talk about, but for the moment, all we get told by Shilonen is that in order to help Mawika out, and I guess she's talking about the second stage of her plan, we need an ancient name to be forged for us. Now, this is something that Mawika probably came up with very recently. I think she actually thought she would repel the Abyss from the Night Kingdom alone, but since we showed up, she is really trying to enlist our help. There's just a little problem with that, and that's we're Outlanders, and Outlanders aren't recorded in the Night Kingdom. Well, as Descenders, we aren't recorded anywhere in Tibet, but yeah, even more so in Natlan. And so, as Shilonen says, even the greatest of artisans cannot create something out of nothing. Just make a quick note of this particular line, because I have a feeling there might be more than just this hidden in this line. Or maybe I'm just overthinking things again, but we'll see. Now, the best way to get a chance to be recorded in the Night Kingdom would be to speak with the Lord of the Night herself, the one who created the Night Kingdom. But as she is leaping in order to extend her own lifespan, the best woman to go is Citlali, the #1 shaman in the Masters of the Night Wind and best granny in Natlan. I don't know if she's the best granny. I'm not really a fan of Citlali, but she was handled quite decently in the Archon quest after all. Now, when we meet her, apart from seeing how awkward she is, she immediately proposes sort of an exchange. We help her find her, well, her grandson, Auroron, who has mysteriously disappeared and could be held captive by the Fatui, and she will help us get in contact with the Lord of the Night. Here they toy with us a little bit. They first let us think that Auroron has been kidnapped by the Fatui, but then we'll end up learning that he's been actively cooperating with them the whole time. He lets us meet Capitano a first time in the Night Kingdom and then a second time on Tevart's surface that same night. In this second meeting, Capitano actually tries to explain his side of things. Like Arlecchino before him, he is genuinely interested in saving Natlan, and by 5.3 we'll know exactly why. Also, he explains why he tried to seize the Gnosis from Mawika, and it has surprisingly little to do with Tsaritsa's plan. In fact, Capitano plants a little seed of doubt within us about Mawika by telling us that she actually would have a backup plan, and that would be the Gnosis. The Gnosis can be used to restore the Night Kingdom and solve Natlan's core problem, but she's unwilling to use it for reasons that she will explain to us the next morning, actually. And Capitano is concerned that for whatever reason she might hesitate too much and be too late to do anything. And I mean, he's partially right, isn't he? Mawika's plan hinges on 2 more people showing up as the 6 heroes of Natlan. And the truth is, Oberon will show up in a little bit, but Shaska will only reveal herself as one of the 6 in the middle of the crisis. So, yeah, I can see where it's coming from. Unfortunately, we can't talk anymore with him because Citlali finds out we're talking with Aron and Capitano, and she literally drags her grandson back to the stadium, or tries to, because Aron fools her again, and thus she is left with nothing but us to get back to the tavern and basically drown her sorrow in alcohol. Which leads first to a rather funny drunk scene with Slally venting her frustration with the world, basically, and then, surprisingly, to a way more serious one where she falls asleep, and in her sleep she delivers an actual prophecy, which in the light of version 5.3 we can interpret a little better. So the chapter of hatred is probably a reference to the hatred between Renova and Capitano, or more generally between Canria and Celestia, and the danger arising in the eyes is probably another reference to Renova and the fact she will exact a life, or she thought she would, because in the end she didn't. Anyway, Citlali wakes up completely sober, but also has got the worst hangover ever. So we propose to take her out to get some fresh air, and once she recovers her spirits, she finally shares some more details about Oberon with us. Now, Oberon is a bit of a special case. He was born with a fragmented, incomplete soul. And on a side note, I wonder if this isn't why they gave him a silver vision instead of a golden one, because you know, the other characters we've seen using silver vision are all Fatui delusion users, and all have kind of weird ties with unsettling powers. So Arlecchino is a descendant of Perineri and is linked to the Crimson Moon dynasty, and Child is linked with Skirk and Surtalogi the Foul. So, yeah. Having a silver vision per se is already a bit of an exception. But I'm really stressing this incomplete feature because you'll see, I really think Overrun was also meant as kind of foreshadowing. And if you think about it, he's not the only character to have something incomplete about him, but we'll see about that later. For now, so this incomplete soul of his prompted the Masters of the Nightwind to use him in a ritual that should have fixed or rather protected the Night Kingdom from the Abyss by essentially attracting souls to Auroran and then weaving a protective net around the Night Kingdom itself. Now, here we touch to the core of Natlan's problem. And it becomes clear it is fundamentally a ley line problem. Now, for version 5.0, I've asked you to count the references to Mondstadt that we encountered, and we got quite a few of them. Now, what we'll be doing is to consider each and every different solution that is proposed to Natlan's ley line problem and see each time what it's going to cost. And I promise you will see where this is going. So, as for the Masters of the Night Wind attempt, this would have cost, of course, Auron's life. The next morning, we finally get a chance to talk with Mawika about the doubts the captain has planted with us the previous evening, and she is surprisingly open with us about that. She explains in due detail exactly why she is so reluctant to use the Gnosis as a solution. And again, it all comes down to the cost. Using the Gnosis to restore the Night Kingdom would essentially replicate the same effect as the ritual Citlali told us the previous evening, the one that would have sacrificed Auron. The Gnosis could use all the souls in the Night Kingdom and weave them into a sort of a protective net to shield the Night Kingdom from the abyss. But in doing so, not only would we be using human souls, which in Tibet seem to be just another form of life, so they are kind of sentient beings, as building materials, but you would also sever the connection between the people of Natlan and their ancestors. You would essentially be destroying the whole system that has been sustaining Natlan this whole time. So no wonder she isn't keen to use the Gnosis. But she is quite honest. She basically tells us not to worry and that she is awaiting the arrival of some scouts in order to pinpoint Capitano's position and try to corner him. So just note that for now, both solutions at our disposal, be it the Masters of the Night Wind ritual or the Gnosis, imply that some form of life gets sacrificed in order to protect what is essentially a ley line net. The situation keeps escalating, and so do the attempts to locate the captain and Auron. Chaska and Quichu, her sister, manage to get their hands on some important piece of information and tell us the Fatui are essentially after a thing called the source mechanism, a dragon device. But the important thing is that we get a whole cutscene because of that. And for no other reason than to make us more invested in the bond between the two sisters, just before they decide to sever it permanently. Thank you, Miyayu. I'm really paying for this. Yeah, I hope they never do this again. Anyway, what really gets things going is actually Citlali's trick. So she tells us Auron has come back and she used the opportunity to kind of jinx the gem that he carries as a stabilizer of a soul that he recently replaced. And she managed to copy a portion of Auron's memories onto it. So she retrieved it, and now we have access to essentially a huge flashback of all that happened in Auroran's perspective. So the first interesting thing here is that when he first meets the captain actually isn't looking for him. He is looking for Citlali. Why is he looking for her? I've told you earlier. The captain's objective is to speak with the Lord of the Night, and Citlali is the only one who can manage that. Then, following this, probably out of concern for both Natlan and Citlali, Auroran keeps following the Fatui, and he witnesses another interesting fact, namely how Capitano is able not only to sense souls just as Auroran does, but also to dispel them as they are starting to leak from the Night Kingdom under the Abyss's constant pressure. I don't know whether he actually used a ritual or a spell from the Masters of the Nightwind there, or if he just used this device. But both are plausible, honestly. The other thing we know is that Auroran has shared his own knowledge about the ritual he was supposed to be a part of with Capitano, and they have come up with something of a modified version of that same ritual. So this time, though, they won't be simply weaving a protective net around the ley lines. They will be straight up reconstructing them. And so far in this game, there has been only one thing that's been said to be able to do this. And if you can't understand or think I'm going too far, just take Paimon's words for it. At the end of this flashback, once we come back to reality, after 3 hours, 23 minutes, and 33 seconds of my botched attempt at a live stream of this quest, Paimon compares this method to the Loom of Fate. The Loom of Fate, the last time we heard about it, we were in version 4.7, Bedtime Story. It was a Dane's Life quest. It has never intersected with any other region's archon quest. It has only been mentioned in Dane's Life's quest up until now. This can't be coincidental. This is the reason why I'm saying Natlan's archon quest isn't just about Natlan. Natlan, in fact, can be seen as sort of a general last dress rehearsal, because trust me, soon this same phenomenon will extend to all of Teyvat. By the end of this video, I will show you exactly why we can say that for sure now. But this is huge. And also, this is really unsettling, because what does it say about the Loom of Fate? So far, we don't know what the cost of using that is, if any. But if every single method they come by to save Natlan ends up in someone having to lose, someone or something having to lose their lives, what can we say about it? What can we say about the Loom of Fate? We'll talk some more about that in a minute, but for now, things are really starting to escalate and accelerate from here. We first go back to Mawika and then straight to the source mechanism location, where Kinich and Ahau distract the Fatui soldiers, and we sneak in the ruins, arriving just at the moment Oberon activates the source mechanism. And then something really strange happens. Instead of just allowing him to become this sort of vessel for souls and repairing Natlan's ley lines, the device instead awakens the Lord of the Night herself. And as she wakes up, as she will later explain, she lets out screech, a sound that, as she put it, agitates souls. Auroron, of course, being already unstable from this point of view, has a very strong reaction to that. And by the way, I can't understand how Capitano can cope with that, because, you know, he's been sharing his inner space, so to speak, with how many souls? Over how many years? I mean, and that core of it, as strong as it might have been, was already damaged during the fight with Mawika. So I don't know, either Cambrian technology was really, really something and it still holds despite the damage and all, or he's really insanely strong to be able to resist something like that. But anyway, back to Oberon, we get this really, really interesting inner monologue, or should I say dialogue, between Oberon, his inner doubts, his inner thoughts, and what we will later discover to be Guthred, the Capitano's second in command, basically. And yeah, at this point, I really, really started to feel uncomfortable about this whole quest. Because, you see, I will understand if you all think I'm going too far this time, but so there has been all of this talk about the Night Kingdom falling to the abyss and how to restore Natlan's ley lines, and now Paimon has even brought about the Loom of Fate itself. And we know the Loom of Fate is tied to the Abyss Order and our twin, but it is also linked to a very specific Canrian clan, of which we still have one representative alive and playable for now. And now I will show you the 3 flashbacks that are shown during Auron's inner monologue, and 3 different scenes from Kaya's hangout, and you'll see they touch upon exactly the same themes, often using very similar words and phrasing. You see, all of this is a little bit too close for me not to consider this an intentional parallel. The only difference is that Arvan is a lot more willing to become this sacrifice. He acts as if he was lacking something and had to make up for that, while Kaya has been shown to be actually resentful of his own situation, so it's likely that he would fight back if given a chance. But on the other hand, the powers he's potentially linked with are way bigger and scarier than what Auroran's has to face here. So for now, it doesn't look like Kaya has got a lot of choice, despite what Mona says. It really makes me think that he could end up in much the same situation as Auroran is here. And yeah, another element that kind of draws me to the same parallel between the two is that the one dragging Auroran's down here is a Canrian. It's Guthred, but at this point we have no clue yet to what is really going on with Capitano. The first clue we have is here, because at this point we recognize Guthred for what he is. We saw his uniform already, and we've learned to recognize his eyes. So here's our first clue that Canria is involved in this Archon quest, and this is also a first. So when you consider this all together, it all really feels like a giant potential foreshadowing, you know. If I'm alright, I really hope they kept the foreshadowing going onto the part where Auroran awakens his tribe's hero, ancient hero, Sanaj, who speaks with him and says, "You're not the person that the others thought you were. And yet you're also not the kind of person that you thought you were." So he kind of hints at a third way. And the Archons know that we do need a third way for Kaya too. Anyway, next it's the Lord of Night's turn to speak. And she drops low bomb after low bomb after low bomb. The first interesting thing she says is, in explaining what happened with Auroran earlier, she mentions she doesn't recognize Guthred's soul because he doesn't belong in Natlan. Next, she goes on to explain how she created the Night Kingdom by patching up what was left of the original ley line network in Natlan that had been destroyed during the war between the dragons and the heavenly principles. And finally, she also mentions that the dragons themselves tried to reconstruct the ley line network by their own means. Without succeeding, of course. Now, if you combine these three informations with what we'll learn later in version 5.3, namely that Canrian souls wouldn't be accepted anywhere, not just in Natlan, but in the rest of Teyvat as well, something really, really puzzling comes out. So, the souls Capitano desperately tried to gather were people who died during Canria's final battle. And the interesting thing is, they died, so they weren't cursed with immortality. This must have taken place before the curse was imposed on Canria. So, if Canrians cannot be received anywhere but in current Natlan, I guess, by the end of 5.3, what does it mean for Canria's stance to Teyvat? Because the ley line network seems to predate even the dragon's rule. What happened that Canria, this nation that was founded somewhere around the time of Dragonspine. There's a piece of lore in Dragonspine that refers to Cambria being founded as a nation around, I think, 2000 years ago. That they aren't able to access the same network that powers the rest of Tibet, since basically its creation. Is there something we're missing? I don't think I'll give you a definite answer yet, certainly not here, it would be too long. But I wonder if this wouldn't tie with what we learn in Manoblythin, the recently released book. It is cryptical, just like Perineri was, but it does seem to have some references to Cambria. Anyway, since I still haven't delved properly into it yet, I will just let it go for now. But if you're interested in theories about Cambria and the dragons and everything, I have a friend of mine who is really into this stuff. If you happen to use Hayulab and like theories, definitely check her page out. Her name is Oriona. And yeah, I I guess I just inserted some friendly promotion here. But back to what else the Lord of the Night says. Then she proposes another solution, and I think it's like the fourth one, to the problem with the ley lines in Natlan. And again, what she proposes is to sacrifice what remains of our life power, of our essence, in order to reconstruct the ley line network. And again, there's this idea that in order to recreate ley lines, some kind of life must be sacrificed. Once again, Mawika refuses to give the Lord of the Night the order to reconstruct the ley lines and sacrifice herself, because, according to Mawika, doing so would essentially erase Natlan's history. It would cut the ties between the people of Natlan and the past heroes. The whole system would essentially be rewritten, and the old Night Kingdom would, of course, disappear along the Lord of the Night herself. This, I wonder if it would hold true even for the rest of Tibet. If a new ley line network is created, I wonder if it would influence the history of Tibet as well. But anyway, this sparks a very exciting and fiery debate between Mawika and Capitano. And I absolutely love that part because each one of them has very strong and very based views. Both of them are very anchored in their own experience. And it was really hard for me to take a side, though. Yeah, I guess you can say, maybe as a trained archaeologist and historian, I am a bit partial to Mawika's side, but I mean, Capitano is right also. Time is running really short, and for all they know at this point, the last hero might never show up in time. The abyss is just under the surface. It's beginning to attack, and something needs to be done. And all Mawika is doing for now is just hoping that somehow the last piece of her puzzle will appear in time. Now, fortunately for her, Auroran intervenes and kind of convinces Capitano to back off and let Mawika go on with her plan. And for now, we reach a standpoint, but there's one last thing that is really interesting in this first half of 5.1, and that's the questions that we get to ask to the Lord of the Night. Everything about those questions is a bit weird and even out of place. Those are the same kind of questions that we got to ask the archons at the end of each chapter of each region, but we aren't at the end of a chapter, and the Lord of the Night isn't an archon, so what's going on? And also, have you had a look at those questions? The power of the heavens, the elemental energy and the abyss, and the Luma Fate is also there. I mean, I guess I could expect the one on the ancient name. At some point we were supposed to talk to the Lord of the Night about that, but still the other three are huge. So I'll take them one by one, starting with the powers of the heaven. And the Lord of the Night has quite a lot to say about them. That's also our very first clear reference to the shades. So far, I think there was just some artifacts lore maybe, and Lilupar also made a reference to the shades back in the Sumeru Desert, but other than that, we never heard much about them. What the Lord of the Night has to say is chiefly about Ronova, because she is the shade that got involved in Natlan, and she is the one who instructed the Lord of the Night on how to create the Night Kingdom, and also the one who lent Shvalanka her power to create the rules that also ensure Natlan's survival. And for that, apparently, she must have been punished in some way, though we don't get a lot of detail here. We only know that's the reason why she apparently fell in some kind of state of self-pity. So generally, she cares less than the other shades about privacy. So that's why we know her name, basically. And one last thing, this is actually something I caught by listening to the English version. So I am currently playing in Chinese. Not for any special reason. I don't understand Chinese at all, but I simply enjoy playing in the original language with, obviously, with English text so that I can understand something, you know? But for this video, I also watched playthroughs in English, and I noticed the Lord of the Night's PA makes a little pause when she talks about the heavenly principles.
It was an expression of love, as well as an act of reparation. She was seen as having significantly overstepped her authorities as a shade, which quite displeased the Almighty Heavenly Principles.
As if she was going to call them by another name, the Almighty something, and then corrected herself at the last moment. I don't know. I'm not sure if this was intentional, if this is also a thing in the original. Chinese speakers of Hyla, please help me on that. But if ever it's the case, it's really interesting, because why did she stop suddenly? Next, we have the question about the Loom of Fate. Again. Which is, in fact, not even a question. By the reaction of the Lord of the Night, we can tell it's more like we tell her this thing exists, and she answers to that information. And what she says is really concerning. So first of all, she can barely believe this thing exists. And what she says is, if this thing is real, it has every chance to be even more powerful than she is. And she is an angel. And she echoes the exact same words Shilon said in the beginning of this quest. Even I cannot create something out of nothing. Even she had to patch the old ley lines, the old broken ley lines in Natlan into a new structure. This is not what the loom would do. The loom would weave entirely new ley lines from nothing. But it's not even finished, because next she says, if we had it now, it would be an excellent solution for Natlan. Except we don't have it, and we know that. It's not like we could go knock on our brother or sister's door, say, hello, brother, sister, mind if I take your little toy there? I have a little ley line problem in Natlan. I promise I'll give it back as soon as I'm done. Thank you. You're the best brother or sister ever. We can't do that. We don't even know where they are now. So what is this question even doing here? The only possible explanation I can come up with is to alert us to the fact that if and when, because at this point I can say when, the abyss will start to encroach on the rest of Tibet, and Natlan has only been the first nation to truly feel its effects because of its peculiar ley line system. When the abyss will start to devour the rest of Tibet, the Loom of Fate will be a real solution. And bear in mind, we started 5.0 with a whole host of references to Mondstadt. So 5.0 we had a lot of references to Mondstadt everywhere, and then 5.1 we have all this talking about ley lines and the Loom of Fate and whatnot. And you're telling me I'm supposed to believe this quest only is about Natlan. You're kidding, right? This isn't about Natlan. This isn't about one nation anymore. The main plot has reached a point where it merged with the Canria line. That's why we talk about the Loom of Fate here. That's why we talk about Canria here. We are in the later stages of the game. Next, we have this question about elemental energy, the 7 elements and the abyss. And so first of all, this is the answer I was quoting earlier when I said this is probably a reason why we can use phlogiston mechanisms at will, because the Lord of the Night essentially says that the 7 elements were created by the heavenly principles. This is kind of important, from phlogiston, from this original element. And she even makes a comparison between white light and the 7 colors and phlogiston and the 7 elements. Considering we originally had a white light power, this could pertain to us directly. So, and another interesting element is what she says after that. She mentions a human realm and a light realm, and I think we can make the hypothesis about a dark realm also. Maybe the abyss is the realm of darkness. This echoes the rumors of other elements besides the seven that we already know, a light element and a darkness element. But this is interesting that they're beginning to reference things like this. It makes me think there might be more coming very soon, sooner than I expected, in fact. As for the last question, the one about the ancient name, I generally think it's there to ease the transition onto the next section of the quest, because you see, we exit that space without much progress on that front, and then immediately Citlali and Shilon get to talk with the Lord of the Night, and she gives them the mirror that will help us get recorded in the Night Kingdom and have our own ancient name. And then essentially we get another little celebration. Natlan had quite a lot of these, maybe a bit too many, in fact. But this time it's definitely also a settlement between Mawika and Capitano, who agree to temporarily set aside their differences and cooperate. They also flex with each other a little bit. And yeah, by the way, one thing I didn't mention earlier about Capitano is by this time we also know he's a Canrian, of course. And to be really honest, that's the moment where I realized he wouldn't ever be playable. I am very sorry for Capitano fans. I think I would have pulled him potentially if he had been playable. Even though I do have a cryo sword already. We do all have a cryo sword. But mine isn't going anywhere in my account. But yeah, still, I have a little theory of mine about playable Canrian characters, and basically when I think of where this story is going and how it is built as a whole, in my opinion, by the end of the main plot, all things related to Canria, except maybe for one exception that I really much hope will stand, will be gone. So, and Kaya has been built as that exception right from the start. They put a lot of effort into letting you think that he's really something peculiar. Having more playable Canrian characters would sort of take this carefully built status away. And I know we have Arlecchino, but at the end of the day, she isn't Canrian. She's a descendant of Perineri, who was in Canria during the Crimson Moon dynasty, but he wasn't originally from Canria. He came from the surface, so yeah, whatever he became after that. And we have Albedo too, but he's a creation by Rhine-Dottir, so is he Canrian? I don't know. And yeah, I know Daneslave has been announced all the way back when we started this adventure in 2020. The same way playable characters are announced. But I don't know, something keeps telling me there won't be any more playable Canrians. And in this respect, I take the end of 5.3 as sort of a confirmation, because narratively speaking, it wouldn't make much sense to me At least that's my opinion. Back to Natlan's Archon quest. What we get next is a very quick transition into the real war. Yeah, because the war that I think by then we all more or less thought would stay in the Night Kingdom and not be shown directly on Tivat's surface suddenly breaks loose. And I swear I almost could hear MiHoYo's developers like whispering in the background, oh, so you think this isn't looking like the Nation of War, do you? Oh, so you want more death and destruction? I'll give you death and destruction now. And that's exactly what we get. Things go very quickly from fairly stable to not so stable to pretty concerning to downright devastating until they more or less culminate with Chaska losing her sister. Now, I will go over very briefly over this section because there isn't anything really relevant to say. Just, of course, after Chaska becomes the sixth hero, Mawika's plan can proceed, so she activates the Ode of Resurrection for everybody. I mean, Chaska, you could make it just a little bit earlier. Your sister would be alive. I know, it isn't your fault. And actually, the scene where she carries Quichu into the stadium right in front of Mawika is one of the most powerful they made. It's almost like she's asking Mawika, why didn't you do anything? Why did this have to happen? And I really appreciated also that they made her stay in this state of shock and sadness, because even if she knows that okay, they have a real chance at succeeding, she doesn't feel any better. Of course, she just lost her sister. She's grieving, so yeah, they really did a nice job there. After that, it's showtime for Mawika, so yeah, that's what I call basically one punch Mawika. She sent Goso Yothot, or whatever that thing's called, back to the Night Kingdom, and in so doing, she literally pierces the sky. So yeah, the sky was fake, Dottore was right, and Scaramouche before him was right. The sky is fake, the sky is a lie. What else is a lie in this world, I wonder? Also, this is the first time that we see, perhaps, the moon fragments, and considering the recent lore drop about the moon and the moon sisters, I feel they are starting to go somewhere, though I still can't tell exactly where they're going. Anyway, after that, understandably, it's fiesta time again, but with a little bit of a catch, since the Abyss is only just repelled. We fought it off, but we didn't entirely defeat it. And in 5.3, it will become clear that the Abyss can't be truly defeated unless we can figure something out. Maybe we can, but as things are now, it's impossible. And Mawika still has to fend it off from the Night Kingdom. So she announces her plan to go into the Night Kingdom with us, upholding Natlan, saying no one fights alone. And then we get this little chat with her, and it kind of doubles down with the one we had with the Lord of the Night. We get the same kind of ask me whatever you want thing that we already had with the other archons, but we have doubled that We had it with the Lord of the Night, we have it again with Mawika, and we aren't at the end of the quest. This is strange, guys. This is normal. They are breaking patterns here. We get a question about the fragments that we saw earlier in the sky and the fact that the sky is fake. And Mawika is kind of worried that the heavenly principles might get a back at her for basically breaking the ceiling, the glass ceiling. But I like the way we reassure her. Don't worry, we did worse in Fontaine, and we did do worse in Fontaine. We destroyed a damn seed. There's one less archon in the world, and a dragon got his powers back. So yeah, I guess if the heavenly principles didn't wake up last year, why should they wake up now? It can't be worse than what we did in Fontaine, yeah. But yeah, other than that, we speak some more of the captain, and that's essentially all. Except we get a little cutscene with Capitano and the Lord of the Night. And this is the point where we don't see the dialogue, of course, but they reach an agreement. And I so love what it is there. I was waiting for this to happen. But I'll get back to that in a while. So for now, after this very packed and exciting version, because I don't know about you, but I really loved 5.1, we get kind of a slower patch. Understandably, because, you know, on one hand, Natlan needs to rebuild, and also on the other hand, they released all the Natlan map. There was the whole world quest available, so it made sense they'd slow up a bit on the Archon quest side. The only two very interesting things about this quest are, on one side, what we learn about Capitano, of course, and on the other side, what we learn about the Abyss. Because the core theme of this version are consequences. The consequences on the land, the consequences on the buildings, but most of all, the consequences on the people. Starting from there, what we see are three different people who have been affected at various levels by the Abyss, and generally speaking, they all experience much the same symptoms, at least the first two do. And they all have to do with fear. And this really reminds me of what we saw back in the Perilous Trail quest the other time, where we really came into rather close contact with the Abyss. Again, if you remember, when we entered, when each of us entered that domain, we were all confronted to our worst fears. And the people we meet now are essentially prisoners of their fears, a little bit like Kachina was also in the Night Kingdom back in version 5.0. So there is this core theme of failure, and mind you, the same theme will return as we and Mawika face the corrupt Pyro Sovereign, or rather that's the form the Abyss will take for Mawika, for us. And again, there will be much talk of failure, of loneliness, of everything is futile, there's no hope. Now, arguably, the last guy, the big guy, is a bit of a special case. Is clearly in this kind of paranoia, just like Chiyo was we had recently the Mikawa festival, and they reminded us also of what Mikoshi Chiyo went through, and how the only solution they could find was finally to cut her off, to kill her, because she didn't recognize anyone else. And yeah, what's different here is that Capitano actually has a solution, and that's the drought of lucidity that incredibly was developed by none other than Guthred, who has come across so far as a rather cruel and heartless person, but here they kind of show his best side in a way. And personally, I think there's a very good reason why they do this now. What they're trying to do, in my opinion, is already they're preparing the final face-off between Capitano and Renova, where clearly Capitano stands on the good side. And what they need us to do is to have a better image of the Canrians as a whole. This has been actually a long-standing process already, so if I had to sum up the whole plot, we spent around a third of it, so essentially the regions of Liyue, Mondstadt, Liyue, and Inazuma, thinking that Canria basically was a bad guy. At least I thought so. All we had to go by were, well, the rune machines and the Abyss Order, so it was easy to think that you had like tried to conquer the world or something like that. And then we reached the We Will Be Reunited quest, the first quest where we met our twin again. And he or she basically told us, no, you got it all wrong. Things aren't as simple as that. Go search. Starting from there, this second third, encompassing essentially Sumeru, Fontaine, and Natlan, where little by little they shift our perception on Canria. So first we go through the Chasm quest, where we learn what the curse is and how illiterals are affected. And then in Sumeru we have a lot of lore about Canria. By the end of it we have a whole quest, the Foreigner quest, where they confirm that yes, they might have invited the Abyss in, but they also fought it off and took the worst damage, and still they fought for the rest of the Vat regardless. And then we have the Caribert quest, which was about the Abyss Order and how it was founded and how the Loom of Fate was created and so on. But also we got to see how an innocent 8-year-old child got to pay a price too heavy for him. And well, Bedtime's story essentially is quite on the same line. In Natlan also, we had the Sulphurous Veins quest, where again, we get told that despite some Natlanese believing that the Canrians were this horde of conquerors and destroyers, actually they fought off the monsters that came out of the Abyss. So again, they're reinforcing this idea, and now we have Capitano, and despite the fact that they're still blending in this initial perception of a very proud and sometimes dangerous people, they also seal this other side of Canria, and this will culminate during the final dialogue between Capitano and Renova. But already here, what they are saying is, yes, Guthred was cruel and heartless, but he also cared in his own very special and maybe twisted way about other people. So maybe Canria had its own way of protecting the world. Now, apart from the awful bit of phasing around his name, which was infuriating, I was so curious and so frustrated when I got to wait a whole 6 more weeks to know the truth. There is another thing we learned about him. We actually saw his face, even though many of you will say, no, we didn't. We actually did. Because if you look closely, that mask never covered his features. It only framed them. It's a mask that goes around here. So the truth is, he doesn't have any facial features anymore. And this actually aligns with both what we know about the Hilichurls, there's the masks lore, and perhaps one of the most disturbing pieces of lore ever put into this game. So in one of the desert golems, I think it's the one in the Valley of Dari, you could find this, you still can, you can find this journal of, it's not clear if he's a Canrian soldier or simply a foreign civilian or soldier who is undergoing this transformation. And I remember back then I was really curious about anything that had to do with Canria, so when I discovered it, I literally threw myself into reading this thing, and it really broke me, because the worst thing is, little by little, his comrades, his companions, start to shun him and fear him, and it was really heartbreaking. And Capitano must have undergone quite the same thing. And just look at the traveler's face. The traveler himself or herself realizes how terrible of a fate that curse is, perhaps for the first time. So much for 5.2 essentially. Then we have 5.3, which more or less closes Natlan's arc, even though I have to note that we will probably have a further chapter. That's because the Gnosis is still in Mawika's hands, and I have a feeling that somehow, at the end of the day, all of the Gnosis will end up in the Tsaritsa's hands. So we might still have a couple of surprises left. But as for the regional arc, 5.3 should have closed it. And up until now, Natlan's plot has been pretty good. I mean, we had an introduction 5.0 like we had in all other regions, with honestly a whole lot more action than I was expecting for an introductory version. Then we had 5.1, which was a blast, literally, and 5.2, which by contrast was a bit slower. So far, I don't have any major complaint. I don't know about you, but 5.3 is really where, in my opinion, they could have done so much better, especially about one character. There's only one character that truly, genuinely fails at what it should have been, and that's the archon Mawika. If you change Mawika, I promise this whole archon quest would have felt so much better, and I'll show you why now. So the quest starts out pretty well actually, because the first thing we see is this sort of vision or dream that seems to take place in the Night Kingdom or something like that, where we see Capitano and his men around him. We recognize Guthred, and he promises to essentially bring them home at last. But all of this anticipation and tension that we built here immediately gets dispelled by what happens next. So we have gathered enough material to start forging our ancient name for good, but instead of, I don't know, focusing on the process of forging it or helping in any other way, we get told by Mawika to essentially rest, which makes sense, but we're starting the final chapter of a region. I would expect a little more build up, you know. Instead, we get invited to this sort of farewell or good luck party by Mwalani and Kachina. And this underlines the second big problem of this whole quest, and this is the excessive amount of focus placed on our main character. I get Mawika chose us to fight with her in the Night Kingdom. I get that we are the protagonist, and so at some point we have to be relevant, but Genshin used to have more subtle means to do that. And although I really think at one specific point they do have a reason to concentrate this much the attention on us, I think this time they really overdid it, because as a result, Mawika as a character suffers. She never is truly at the center of attention, and she's the archon. She's the one who's supposed to solve this whole thing, right? But all the attention is on us for some reason. We're even the ones who get to invite Mawika to the party. And I get that the people of Natlan may feel a bit awkward inviting their arc into such a small party, and I get what they were probably trying to do was to give us this feeling that Mawika was slowly detaching herself from her people at this point, because she was essentially in her mind preparing herself to die. But even the thing they tried to do with the painting isn't really compelling for two reasons. Firstly, because it centered around something we saw in the trailer, mainly with her sister, and because it's really the only aspect they tried to develop. She really feels shallow at this point. Well, anyway, we end up inviting her to the party, so breaking her supposed attempt at an isolation. So this is failed. And during that party, the only interesting bit is that there's this talking about dreams. Everyone has been dreaming about loved ones who have passed during the war. And Auron tries to do this little ritual to better understand what exactly we dreamt of. So the next thing we do is we accompany Kachina back to her tribe so that we can also check on Shilonan and Citlali. this trip actually serves two main purposes. The first one is on a symbolical level. We're doing exactly the same thing as we did back in 5.0, but in reverse. So in 5.0, we had this large introductory section where we accompanied Kachina to the stadium and then went with Mualani to her tribe, where things started to pick up after or with the first attack we witnessed to the people of the Springs tribe. Now we do exactly the opposite way. We go back to where we started in a way. And during this trip, we'll go over some of the milestones of that trip and see how much has changed. We really get this feeling of closure in some way. The second the purpose of this trip is to once again build on what was said in version 5.2. So we meet Ayu, Kachina's sovereign companion, that we knew again from version 5.0, and we learn he's been having a hard time since both his grandparents died during the war, and he's not been eating, he's not sleeping well, he's in a really bad shape. And what we do is we give Kachina the drought of lucidity that we obtained from Capitano in version 5.2. And it works wonders, basically. So everyone starts just like we did in the previous version. Everyone starts to think really positively about Capitano. And again, this will prepare the final face-off between Renova and Capitano. We mentally are on Capitano's side more and more at this point. Now, once we get back to the Children of Echoes, we check on Citlali and Shilonen, and of course, Shilonen has done her job. Our ancient name is almost ready. All that's left is to test it and see if it's really attuned to the Night Kingdom. So we go with them to test it out in the sulfurous veins region and think about it. What is this scene really about again? We know it's not about our ancient name. We know it will work. So what are they trying to show us? So during the test, what we see is that all of a sudden there's all these souls around us that have been either rejected or have leaked out of the ley lines, essentially, of the Night Kingdom. Mawika has been telling us that the Night Kingdom is under extreme stress, so it makes sense. But what we truly see is the fate of the souls that can't go back to the ley lines, to the Night Kingdom. And Citlali tries to guide the souls back to the Night Kingdom, but she will fail for everyone but two of them, among them Vichama, who we discovered died during the war. And she explains that those whom she couldn't guide back will be essentially constantly eroding and preyed upon by the feelings they had upon their death. And we see those feelings, we hear them. Most of them are scared or lost or feel regret. Citlali herself feels quite pained by this. It's a terrible, terrible fate. Again, this is in preparation for what we will learn later, namely, Canrian souls never could go back to the ley lines. Even before the curse was imposed, since all Khaenri'ahns are now cursed with immortality. But this is the fate those who managed to die before that curse was placed had to suffer anywhere in Tibet, not just here. The only ones who will end up having this kind of blessed rest, I guess, are those that Capitano managed to save. This is what they're trying to tell us here. And they even went the extra mile, of course, with the absolutely heartbreaking scene of Ayo sleeping in his grandparents' lap as they decide to let themselves fade away rather than leaving him alone. At this point, I was barely holding back who am I fooling? I was crying like a baby. So after all of this, as we go to sleep, you'd expect we'd be absolutely 100% motivated to go and kick some serious abyss butt in the Night Kingdom, right? Well, all of this motivation they managed somehow to rebuild up after the party gets absolutely crushed by the upteenth speech given by Mawika before we go. And at this point, I really feel each and every time Mawika is on screen, she gives some kind of really motivating and inspiring speech, or she explains something. It's like she doesn't even have a personality. I don't know. That's my feeling at least. And I get the occasion is rather grand and official and everyone is gathered and all, but again, it really kills the tension. And also, we have the same problem as in the beginning of this quest. The attention is all shifted and concentrated on us. I get we just had our brand new name and everyone's curious about it, but might I remind you that originally Mawika was supposed to solve this problem alone. If we hadn't shown up when we did in Natlan, her plan was to go and confront the Abyss in the Night Kingdom alone. What are we even doing there at the center of everyone's thoughts? Once we get in the domain, things don't get any better. So first we can drag things even further on by speaking again with each tribe's chief and hero, and Paimon's probably the only one I really wanted to speak with because, you know, she's really our companion. But other than that, then we start off with Mawika, which could have been a positive. I mean, I get they also wanted us to have a good look at her gameplay, but it could have been an opportunity if she hadn't just faced an Abyss Lector, a random one, and again her sister. While we, on our end, got to meet basically every person that we had met before and that died during the war. So Atia and Quichu and Malcolm Bichama, who are finally reunited. That was one of the few positives for me. I really love them. They're cute. And even Guthred, or rather Guthred's memory, or idealized memory, which really warmed up my heart. But just try to think how much better it would have been if this series of encounters would have been split between us and Mawika, with maybe us meeting Malcolm Bichama and maybe Guthred, and instead Mawika having to face Atia and Quichu. it would have brought so much more depth to her character. She would have had to answer Kuichu and perhaps reminisce of the present, not of our past life, but of her life in the present time with Atia instead. And also another thing that really wore me down was all the parkour with the different Saurians. Again, the idea is that we shift through all of the Saurians, companions of the different tribes, but it was really unnecessary in my opinion. Finally, we get to a point where things are so decayed that we have to rely on the Lord of the Night's help to get on. At this point, we have the strange scenes with the 6 original heroes of Natlan calling us to knock, I think, but we don't really get what this means for us. And most importantly, the Lord of the Night also calls us. She tells us, bring a miracle forth, reserved for the divine. And she calls us the kindle that we call humanity. And I don't know, I feel this might be important in future quests. The Lord of the Night has already spoken of a realm of humanity, so maybe we as descenders have something to do with that, but so far it's only a name. Other than that, as we finally join Mawika against the abyssal entity that has taken the form of the Pyro Sovereign itself. I mean, I guess it's a fitting nemesis for the Pyro Archon. We have what I told you before. So during all of the fight, the abyss throws at us those phrases. It keeps telling us there's no hope, we will fail, everything must perish. You really get this feeling of despair. It's trying to incite despair in us so that we abandon the fight. And it's evident even in Mawika's little inner walk, where she actually responds to those, can I call them threats? And this could have been inspiring, and if the resolution hadn't been so underwhelming again. All of this is, of course, a personal opinion, but I guess this is really why many people are disappointed with Natlan. So at one point, the flame goes out, the sacred flame. We come inches from losing, but somehow Katrina starts singing, and then everyone else, and this cheering somehow rekindles the flame and gives us the strength to fight again. But if this wasn't enough, we get to the second part of the fight, where so the Lord of the Night gives us our mantra that goes with our sacred name, with our ancient name, and that's expected. We know ancient names also have this sort of quote that reveals itself to its bearer, so this makes sense at least. But then we get to hear each tribe's hero feelings and thoughts that were gathered by Citlali and Shilonen in secret as we purify the different vibes of the 6 tribes. I don't know about you guys, it really felt way too much, mainly because this was supposed to be Mawika's big battle. Her whole life, her whole new life, has been directed towards this one point. And instead, the focus is all on us. We are the savior. We are the hero. Genshin has never been doing this previously. We always lent a hand when necessary. We have been determining, but even against Raiden, we fought her. But it was Miko that finally made her understand that she needed to stop. Against the Academia, it was a group effort. Against Liyue, it was a group effort. In Fontaine, we basically just witnessed things. We didn't succeed, and luckily so, in making Fulrina tell us the truth. We never were this central, and here the focus I really feel should be on Mawika. To top it all, we get back on Mawika's bike, a little bit of marketing strategy again, I guess, and once we get back to the stadium, there's a staggering 20 minutes long celebration in our honor, during which Mawika stays completely on the side. No one pays attention to her. The only thing I say about this is the really heartwarming hug between us and Paimon. That was genuine, and it makes sense that Paimon would be more worried about us than anyone else. We've been traveling Tibet for 4 years now. It makes sense that she would jump in our arms like she did, and I love that. But other than that, no one in the whole of Natlan gives half a damn about Mawika. All the attention is focused on us, and it doesn't make sense, guys. It doesn't. It just doesn't. Although, I'll say it, I think they have a reason for really hyper focusing all of this attention with the dance and the autographs and the ceremony and all of that, because all of a sudden Citlali interrupts the festive atmosphere. Citlali is very worried because she checked Mawika's fate again and nothing has changed. And in this moment, we finally snap back into reality and put all the pieces together. Mawika used the Yod of Resurrection. Mawika used Ronova's power to fend off the abyss. And the price for that power is death. And in theory, only Mawika can and must pay that price. But death is a rule and cannot be changed. Fate we can influence, we can change the how and when. We cannot change the rules. This is something that I feel will apply even to further quests, but for now, since Mawika has the choice on the how, when, and why, she has decided to use her life to fuel the Lord of the Night for as long as she can and give the Lord of the Night the strength to keep the Night Kingdom standing for some time more. As we do that, and after a bit of brainstorming, we figure out where Mawika could be together with Renova and rush there. And we essentially teleport to Natlan, thankfully, because it's quite far from the stadium. And we find ourselves directly in this very creepy looking place, which is above Natlan, the seat of the primal fire. And the first thing we lay eyes upon are eyes. Because Renova looks like a biblically accurate angel. Very creepy, if you ask me. Now, this last sequence I'll get over immediately with the bad part. Again, Mawika. She is completely detached and almost doesn't feel human. She is the only human archon, yet she doesn't display any kind of feeling, to the point where even the Lord of the Night inquires, what about what you want? And she refuses to elaborate on what her feelings truly are. And this could have been interesting if we were shown even just an inkling of what she truly thought. When I compare this with what we saw in Fontaine, I get absolutely furious. I mean, we had Faukeler looking at the guillotine, because it was one, above her, as a god, an oceanid. She wasn't human. And yet, she thought to herself that if there's one thing humans and archons have in common, is that they all fear death. She felt so human in that moment. We all were absolutely heartbroken and on the edge of our seats in that scene. Here, we can't feel anything because Mawika doesn't show anything to empathize with. Compared to her, even Renova, which is intentionally made to sound very detached and robotic and superior, shows more emotion once she is confronted by Capitano, because she can tell she is absolutely furious to have to let her own rules go. The Lord of the Night herself at least shows care and compassion for the humans she is supposed to help. But not Mawika. Mawika is completely deprived of any visible emotion. Back to the lore, though. So the first really interesting bit is what Renova says to Mawika as she accepts her death. She tells her the heavenly principles are pleased that the people of Natlan have managed to stand against the abyss, and they've exceeded the expectations of the heavenly principles. I wonder what this means. But again, we don't have enough information. This will have to be relegated to a corner of my mind for future quests. Next, there's this line. Here is where Renova officially accepts the sacrifice made for the Lord of the Night as payment for using her power. This phrase here is what will enable Capitano to take Mawika's place. Otherwise, only Mawika could have repaid that debt. Starting from there, it's really interesting that the Lord of the Night is evidently trying to buy time. Once you know that she already made an agreement with Capitano, it's clear that she is just beating around the bush, waiting for Capitano and Auron to join. So, when Auron and Capitano finally come, we reach the real climax of this entire arc, as well as one of the biggest lore drops of the quest. First of all, we get to know Capitano's full backstory, and we also know his name, Thryne. I don't know why, but I was expecting him to be someone we'd already heard about, but anyway. We get to know how he was implanted this device to extract information from the ley lines. Now, this is the first interesting thing. What was Canria hoping to achieve with that device? We know that they desperately looked for information because we can find traces and clues about that everywhere. We know Canria climbed up to Dragonspine and looked for possibly the power of the nail that's there if the code has been correctly deciphered by the web. We know that they looked in Surumi Island and also in Enkanomiya. They tried to steal before Sun and Moon, for example. And we find them basically everywhere. It is obvious they were desperately looking for something, but why? I think I might have reached sort of a conclusion, but I think I'll leave it for maybe a future video or something. Anyway, Thryne then decided to modify his device as the cataclysm struck and use it to store as many souls as it could into it, both Natlanese and Canrian, saving them from the fate that we saw the lost souls suffer while we tested our ancient names in the sulfurous veins. Then he gives Ronova his ultimatum, and the way he does it, you realize many things. First of all, he's not doing this for Mawika, and this is something I am really grateful for. You can feel the degree of hatred that is nurtured over half a millennia, and rightfully so, because what he says next is basically what I had been waiting for ever since the chasm. Because, well, we've been told that Canria has done something horrible, and that's why it was punished. But who's Canria actually? So far, we know that only 5 people, maybe 6 or 7, if you suppose Dane's life and King Irmin weren't already counted among the sinner, did something. They seized the power of the abyss for themselves. And yet, the sinners are precisely the group of people from Canria who still retain some degree of agency in this world, apart maybe from, well, Capitano and Piero, who is also Canrian, and Yeah, I'm not counting Kaya in this because he wasn't even alive at the time. But yeah, so those who are responsible doesn't seem to have to suffer the same kind of consequences as everyone else. I know that Verfolnir at least seemed to be somewhat limited in his action when we saw him, but did we actually see him? He looked sort of chained into this very creepy domain and this purple crystal and whatnot. But Rheindotter certainly can move from one place to another. And as for Surtalogi, we don't know where he is, but his pet seems to be doing fairly well. So, yeah, it really does feel like an utter injustice. I had been waiting for so long for someone to say it clearly, but more than that, Capitano manages to do something that literally made me cry with satisfaction. He made Ronova eat her own words. He made her renounce her rules. Though I actually think what he was hoping for was that she would drop the curse instead. Because the way he phrases it, I think he thought she would have dropped the curse of immortality and let him die. But instead, she answers that the curse must stand. And as furious as she might be, she pronounces her own rules. Now, this essentially allows Capitano to merge with the Lord and the Knight, and it really turns out to be a win-win situation because on one hand, the Lord and the Knight now gets limited life supply because the curse is still in place, and on the other hand, Capitano, well, I guess being fused with an angel somehow removes the side effects of the curse and allows him to finally be at peace. The Lord of the Night confirms that Capitano is gone in consciousness at least, so only the shell of his body remains. This also allows him, as essentially the new master of the Night Kingdom, to twerk the rules a little bit in accord with the Lord of the Night, and allow not only his men to access it, but also other outlanders, because apparently foreigners couldn't die in Natlan prior to this. They would have been shut out of the ley line system essentially, and I wonder if that's not why also in Mondstadt we learned that dying in Marajibari was the absolute worst fate you could imagine for Mondstadter at least, because the wind doesn't blow in the Marajibari, or there's something else going on, could also be. Natlanese people also finally can leave, and this doesn't really get explained, I guess, with the whole system of the ancient names and the constant war and Oda resurrection power. The Night Warden wars aren't needed anymore, so they aren't as bound to the Night Kingdom as they previously were. All of that we get explained in the 18th recap and explanation by Mawika, who really hasn't done anything else in this whole arc. I know I'm perhaps a bit biased, but yeah. And after that, we get to see the monument that the people of Natlan acted for their dad and also Capitano and the Hanrin soldiers who died in the Cataclysm to save Natlan. And again, I am biased, okay, when it comes to Canria. You must have guessed it already, but I sometimes still stop by there just to read the epitaph because, you know, first of all, it's really beautiful. Arfidius Superbia Donais Requie, I don't know, it's to the children of pride, let them rest in peace. It's so beautiful, and also it's the first time we see Canrians being recognized officially for anything else beside being this warmongering nation, which they don't seem to have been, or at least not completely. So yeah, it really marks a change, a shift in how Canria is perceived. By the end of this arc and by the end of this video, because I promise it won't be long yet, what conclusions can we draw? So first of all, I think we now can understand why MiHoYo has been sort of pushing that hero narrative for roughly 2/3 of the quest. And the point is, I think they were trying to mock that stereotype. Because at the end of the day, who saved Natlan? We took care of the abyss in the Night Kingdom and, well, defeated the corrupt Power Sovereign and whatnot. But who restored the Day9s? That was the core problem, right? It wasn't us, it was Shrine. And also, by contrast with all the cheering and moral support we got, Shrine did this in a very bare, dry scene with only 4 people bearing witness to his last stand. And yeah, that kind of reminds me of something Nicole told us all the way back in Sumeru. Trust your own eyes, trust your own experience more than what everyone around you might feel or think or tell you. Because at the end of the day, you are the one experiencing this story, and it's your task to tell what's true and what's not. Next, I think we can spend some more words about the kind of solution that we found, or rather that Capitano found. Well, 5.1, I've been talking at length about all the different possibilities, and we saw that whichever solution we found, it implied some kind of life or life form to be sacrificed. And I know that technically speaking, Capitano avoided that. He wasn't sacrificed. And it's highly ironical because if there is one person who really wanted nothing more than to die, he couldn't achieve that in the end. So yeah, there's a bit of an irony there, and yet I can't help but feel it's still a very good parallel to what we saw Carrybird become in Bat's story, because we know Carrybird was immortal as well. He had been turned into a hilichurl, and so when we met him again in 4.7, we discovered that he was sort of taken on a different plan of existence. He was made into the prototype Loom of Fate, over which he had total control. And as long as that prototype was active, as long as it existed, he had complete total control over it. And it's more or less the same thing that Capitano became. He will stand there as long as the Night Kingdom does, and he has total control over it. So this parallel really makes me think, again, this quest really points to the general picture, and there's two more factors that really confirm that. The first one is what happened in the Lantern Ride quest right after this one. The whole issue with the border and Hu Tao nearly dying. We know because Ningguang told us that the problem is expanding to the rest of Tibet. Natlan just felt it earlier than the other region because of its imperfect ley line system, but very soon the whole of Tibet will be engulfed. And I really wonder what else can we think of apart from the Loom of Fate, which I really feel will have a cost, as I said. One possible solution is actually tied to the huge moon low drop they gave us a while ago in the still ongoing event. I wonder when the next drop will be. Basically, it did two things. So it confirmed an old theory of mine, actually, that's that Tibet originally had a linear infinite timeline, so it was eternal, up until the eternal moon fell, and then I think we can safely say that this whole cycle business began. So Tibet now has cycles of life and death, and also a final destruction looming over it. But what they also said is that that same moon might come back. So maybe we have other options aside from the Loom of Fate. There's just one catch with this, and it's linked to the last really big question that the Natlan Archon quest left open. Because you see, we saw Renova, the one who put that curse into place to begin with, refuse to lift it, even if just for Thryne, and instead forsake her own principles. And she could have had two different reasons why she did that. The first one being maybe the curse is so embedded into Tibet's structure by now that it's utterly impossible for anyone to mess with it. Or she could have feared the heavenly principles reaction. You know, she already messed with them once, which she doesn't want to attract any more attention to herself. But whatever the truth is, I have a big problem with that because, you know, we know for sure there is at least one person who managed to get rid of that curse for himself and for his descendants. We saw Clothar Alberic's skeleton at the end of the Carryboat quest with our own eyes. We made that remark that he must have found a way to get rid of the curse. But how? How? I mean, even if you factor in Verfolnir, it doesn't really make sense. Because let's take the first option and say that the curse is inherently structural to Tibet. Thryne and Clothar were trying to do exactly the same thing. We know that Renova had access to Tibet's structure because we put that curse in it, right? And yet you're telling me Verfolnir, that let's say he did it. could do something, the Shade who put that curse into place couldn't. You're not telling me the sinners are more powerful than the Shade of Death, are you? Let's take the second option, because this first option feels too much. So, Renova just feared the heavenly principles, and that's why she refused to lift that curse. Okay. Now, I can maybe think that Verfolnir, being a sinner, he would be out of reach for the heavenly principles. Let's just assume this. But what about the Alberic? They've been living, I don't know about peacefully, but let's say peacefully in Tibet for 200 years, right? And they haven't heard of the heavenly principles so far. So what's the deal? The heavenly principles aren't exactly known for making any type of fine distinction between those actually responsible for something and those who just happen to be in the same boat as them. Canria, all of Canria suffered for 5 people mistakes. That's what Thrine said. 99% of them weren't even aware of what was going on. And Fontaine, all of Fontaine, every last Fontainean would have been wiped out, despite Egeria having been the one who decided to turn Oceanids into human-like beings. I know the first Oceanids asked, but what about their descendants? We know they managed to have children to the Fountain and Lucine. They would have paid too, so the heavenly principles don't give a damn about who gets killed in their fury as long as they can have a clean slate. So why haven't the Alberic had any consequences in 200 years? It doesn't make any sense. There's just one other option, and at least in my opinion, and that's that in truth, Verfolnir and Clotter never touched that curse. What they came up with probably is just a mean to shield the Alberic from its effects, meaning that they technically still are under the curse. The curse was never truly touched. Now, narratively speaking, this is a monumental and terrifying device. It could have something to do with Kaya's eye patch that still is a mystery, because I don't know about you guys, I do trust Kaya as a character, but there's one thing I don't trust about him, that's his wits. So when he says his eye is fine, it might be fine, but fine isn't the same as normal. So it still could have something different. And if they truly have this thing that shields them from this curse, and let's say they obtained it with Verfolnir's help, it really worries me, because, you know, once you undo a curse, it's hard to put it back into place. But if you're just shielded from it, it's easy to remove a shield or to break it or whatever. And we know, Mona says Kaya has a choice to make between Canria and Mondstadt, whatever those 2 words mean by now, because things are really starting to get big. But the hangout in particular made it clear that Kaya really doesn't want to have anything to do with Canria. He considers it to be his past, and as much as it could catch up, I quote, with him, I don't see him willingly betraying Mondstadt by this point. So what could prompt him to have at least a doubt? Well, having that shield, if it indeed I'm right and it is one removed, could be a very compelling argument to make him do what the Abyss Order wants. And yeah, I think I don't need to tell you how terrifying of a perspective this is for me. But there is one positive, I guess. This Natlan Archon quest also taught us never to underestimate a Canrian, because really, as long as they have one last card left in their deck, they're going to fight back. So I really want to believe that if Kaya inherited half the spirit Capitano had, he's going to put up at least a very good fight. And if you managed to watch this far, thank you for following me on this lengthy breakdown of the Natlan Archon quest. Let me know what you think. Did you enjoy the Natlan arc? Do you think there's something I missed? What could the implications be for the main plot? Let's discuss. And more than that, let's enjoy together the new version, whatever surprises the collective of Plenty might have for us. And in the meantime, I'll try and work on some more videos to provide to you all. See you soon, guys!